In this video, we're going to talk about Ella Fitzgerald, and she's one of the most famous jazz singers probably in history, just all over the world. And I'll show you her right now. Here's Ella, our beautiful angel. Ella Fitzgerald was born on April 25th, 1917 in Newport News, Virginia. And just to since we've already talked about Louis Armstrong, just kind of as a reminder, Louis Armstrong was born in 1901. So they're still living in the same century, but Ella was born 16 years after Louis Armstrong. And that means also one of the things we talked about in our Louis Armstrong video was all of the like historical events that were going on in the United States while they were living there during that time period. So you're going to get a lot of really similar ones for Ella that you got for Louis Armstrong. So we're talking about the World War One, and then the Roaring Twenties in the 1920s, and then the Great Depression in the 1930s, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Korean War. All of those things also happened during Ella Fitzgerald's life, and did kind of shape the way that her life went, and the way that the music was being presented during that time period, because historical events always have an effect on the music of the time as well. So just kind of keeping that in mind as we go through her lifetime. So after she was born in Newport News, Virginia, she moved to Yonkers, New York with her mother and her mother's new partner, Joseph Da Silva. And a lot of these folks that we're going to talk about have struggled through their childhood and then were really talented and incredible musicians. And Ella Fitzgerald is one of them. She went to several schools before she started at Benjamin Franklin Junior High in 1929. And during that time period, she actually wasn't super into singing, but she was really passionate about dancing. She used to kind of dance in the hallways and put on shows for her, or put on performances for her friends during class transitions and during lunchtime and stuff. And continuing to talk about her just early musical experiences, Ella Fitzgerald's family was really involved in a local Methodist church, and that's where she got a lot of her early musical experiences. She also used to listen to recordings of Louis Armstrong, who we talked about, Bing Crosby, who's another singer from the time, and the Boswell sisters, who are a trio from the time. And Ella Fitzgerald, used to try to mimic the vocal quality of the Boswell sisters' lead singer, which is kind of, I think, where she got a lot of her style from. She has a similar tone, but then made her style her own and stuff. So it's cool that she used to listen to Louis Armstrong during this time period when she was growing up, because like I said, he was born 16 years before her. So it's cool that he was putting out recordings and then she got to listen to those when she was growing up. So again, like I said, a lot of these folks that we're going to talk about have kind of traumatic early childhood experiences. So Ella Fitzgerald's mom actually died in 1932 after she was in a car accident, and the injuries were too much for her body to handle. And she was left in the care of her stepfather initially. And within a year, she moved in with her aunt in Harlem. And that was because she was not treated well by her stepfather, or there's rumors that she was not treated well by her stepfather. And that kind of thing led to Ella skipping school and just in general not doing well with that. So she did move in with her aunt after she was made to live with her stepfather. And the nightmare kind of continues for a while in her young age. Ella sometimes, since she was having a struggle in school, sometimes what she would do was work as a runner, is what it's called, for a mafia affiliated illegal lottery. So that was she was the one who would run back and forth and say, kind of keep lookout, I believe, is what I have gathered from trying to look up what that job means. Eventually, she was caught as a child who was doing those kinds of things. She was caught, and she was placed in what was called the Colored Orphan Asylum. So, number one, we got to remember that this is in, let's see, the 1930s. Yeah, this is in the early 1930s. So this is when we've still got a lot of places at this point that are still going to be called the Colored Orphan Asylum, because we're still in a time period where we're recovering from like the Civil War and Reconstruction, all that stuff at the end of the 1800s, and now we just came off of like World War I, and we haven't been through like the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s yet. So you got to keep in mind where we are in the history of the United States, especially as it relates to racism and the way that that plays into the government policies and the way that people are allowed to treat other people at this point in time. So the other word that I wanted to kind of bring up here is the word asylum. Usually we think about asylum as like a place where you go if you have some mental health issues. However, in this case, this actually just means it's an orphanage for Black children. So that's what the Colored Orphan Asylum is. It's an orphanage for Black children. And eventually the orphanage actually got too crowded, and Ella Fitzgerald was moved to New York Training School for Girls. And she ended up running away from this school and was homeless for a while as well. She was not having a good time, so you can imagine. So about this time when she's in the training school and then she's homeless during 1933 and 1934, she started making money by just singing in the streets in Harlem. And near the end of 1934 was when she initially won first prize at an amateur night at the Apollo Theater. So the Apollo Theater has been really famous throughout history, and there are several people that we know today for their musical talents who got their start by going to amateur night at Apollo Theater, and she won one of those amateur nights, and it was a big deal. She also, in 1935, she got the chance to perform with the Tiny Bradshaw Band at the Harlem Opera House. That was a big deal as well. And the first time that she really got the attention of the public was when she co-wrote a song called A Tisket A Tasket. And we'll listen to that song a little bit later. It is kind of has some nonsense lyrics and is like a very fun jazz song that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. She also became the band leader at the Savoy Ballroom in 1939 when the original or the previous band leader died, and it was renamed Ella and Her Famous Orchestra, which is pretty cool. She had her whole band just named after her because she was in charge. So let's talk about a little bit of her influence on others. Fitzgerald's talent allowed her to open doors for herself and many Black performers who followed her, who came after her, and were also trying to make it just in the musical world. Because at this point in time, we're still experiencing like Black jazz musicians are performing and they're putting out really great content, but then you're still having situations where like white jazz musicians are trying to kind of claim jazz for their own, and they're like not necessarily allowing like Black people to come to their concerts or to perform at their concerts unless you're in cahoots, I guess, with a guy like Norm Granz. So there are several people like this throughout the history who are really trying to like integrate music, specifically jazz music, and who are trying to like fight for the rights of their of the musicians that they manage, or just like other musicians who are trying to fight for the rights of other musicians. You get a lot of those throughout history. So Norm Granz is one of them. In 1954, Ella made him her sole manager. And he was a civil rights activist who did fight for equality for the musicians he managed, not for the musicals he managed, for the musicians that he managed. And I am going to find really quick here the story about when Norm Granz actually did that at a JATP concert. Just like a one example of a jazz at the Philharmonic concert where Norm Granz was actually like very specifically trying to integrate the audience. Was it one of the things he did at this particular concert that Ella was performing at was that he during the concert like went and changed the bathroom doors originally said like, here's the white bathroom, here's the Black bathroom, which was common for that time period. And Norm decided that he was going to, in the middle of the concert, I guess, like remove those labels and have both of them say integrated bathrooms, and just to let people deal with that. So a lot of people freaked out because that wasn't like a common thing for the time period. But that was the type of thing he would do because he was just trying to make sure that everybody was able to be heard and that Ella's audiences were integrated because that was really important to him. And Ella left that band that she was in, the Ella and Her Famous Orchestra, in 1932, and then released 63 albums, live and studio, and performed all over the world for eager audiences for about 5 decades. So she died in 1996 after a lot of stuff happened. In 1985, she was hospitalized for respiratory problems. 1986, she was hospitalized for heart failure. 1990, she was hospitalized for exhaustion. 1993, she was actually hospitalized for amputation as a result of the effects of diabetes. And then finally, after all of that, she died on June 15th, 1996. She was 79 years old. She had a long life where she was able to provide just really awesome music for a lot of people. She had a lot of influence on the way jazz is as we hear it today, and she was actually nicknamed the First Lady of Song. She had a few other nicknames, but that's one of them, First Lady of Song. So she's very important in the history of jazz and just in the history of the success of black musicians in general for a lot of reasons. So I mentioned this song, Tisket A Tasket, which is one that she co-wrote, and I have found a live performance of Ella Fitzgerald performing this song in Australia in 1960. And this is a very cool video because she is an interesting performer, and that sometimes she's just singing for herself and sometimes she is performing for the audience, but she's just such a cheerful person, and she's like sweet and she's funny and she's just like very enjoyable to watch as an audience member. So I'm gonna start this video a little bit before she starts singing so you can see her talk, so you can see a little bit more of her personality. So here is Ella Fitzgerald singing live in Australia in 1960. So one of the other things that we talked about in the Louis Armstrong video was his influence on scat singing. And Ella Fitzgerald is actually another person who's really good at scat singing. She doesn't necessarily showcase it in this particular song, but Ella has like recordings of her just scat singing. Remember, scatting is singing like nonsense syllables. Um, she has recordings of where she's just scatting for like 7 minutes, where she's just making it up on the spot, like you would with an instrument, and it's just absolutely incredible. So, that's Ella Fitzgerald. She's a really amazing musician, and we have learned a lot from her. So there you go, Ella Fitzgerald.